Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today I'm so happy to have Wendy Dale with us. And let me tell you a little bit about Wendy. She's the founder of Memoir Writing for Geniuses. She offers coaching and classes for newbies and professionals to write their memoirs using principles instead of a process of trial and error. Her memoir, Avoiding Prison and Other Noble Vacation Goals, was published by Three Rivers Press, a division of Penguin Random House. She's also the author of the book, The Memoir Engineering System, the result of 15 years of research, which details a 7-step process that allows writers to craft their memoirs from the ground up with no structural errors. This is exciting. Welcome, Wendy, to the program.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, Estelle.
So I read this book back in March, and I've been working on my own memoir about my days as a magazine editor-in-chief while searching for love and being the dating diva.
Love it.
And I talk a lot about structure in my book, Writing That Gets Noticed, and as a writing teacher, but I've written and talked more about like short form projects, essays, articles, micro memoir, but the idea of transferring all these ideas into memoir is what is really interesting to me and what I'm actually applying in my own memoir as I work on it now, or I will be now that I read the book again and refreshed myself. So let's start at the very beginning. I know engineering and structure is so important to you, to the process, and I agree with that. Structure is a big part of what I talk to authors and writers about for Freelance Writing Direct. So where did this all begin, this idea of creating the right structure and then not getting caught up in trial and error and writing for decades?
So I wrote this book because it was the book I wish I'd had 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I love writing prose. I think most of us do, right? Who cares about structure? Structure is not a really interesting topic. And I thought it was the final draft of Avoiding Prison and Other Noble Vacation Goals. We're talking back in, 2000, right? So a long time ago. And I started sending it out to agents and got some response, not a ton. And finally got an agent who wrote back to me and said, "You have a great narrative voice and you know nothing about structure." And so that was the beginning, understanding that I didn't know what structure was and I needed to. So then I structured the book with her help and got it published. And then it was time to write another memoir. And I realized I knew nothing about structure. I knew how to structure one memoir. And that was kind of the beginning. I started coaching memoir. And that was when I really started to realize that I needed to understand what structure was. What is structure? How does it work in a book? How do you take these stories from your life and turn them into plot?
And what I love about this book is I've read a lot of book about memoir, and some of it is so esoteric. They use the academic words that people who graduate proudly with MFA degrees are like, we will excavate and we will, but it doesn't get to structure. It might talk about plot. So you use the words transition. And I think of that as like reflection or insight, that added little something. And you talk about main event, which is the point of a scene. And you're very bare bones. You're not like, let's imagine this is happening in your life. It's like, this is what you need to do, just like an engineer would explain, but in very, I call it reader-friendly terms. So it's like everyone can access this and not feel intimidated and feel that they have a way to move forward. In fact, I'm going to go back and do everything that you say to do in the book and see where I end up. So you talk about the importance of structure and you talk about leaving things out, which is definitely important to do because people want to write about every single thing. And I talk about this in my book, like, we walked to the grocery store and we looked at the array of products on the shelf. Most of them were in red. Red is supposed to stimulate imagination. Then a homeless man yells at me, "Get out of the store. You have no business being here." And I would say to my students, where does the scene start? Which you give several examples
Yeah.
in your book. And the fact is, it starts when something starts to happen. And that's what you talk about. And you talk about in a scene that people think that a scene is just by using descriptive language, and it's not. Can you expound on that a little bit?
I love how much attention you paid to reading this book. I'm really grateful. I loved how you marked it up. Best interview ever. Thank you so much, Estelle. So you're making me so happy. All right, so much to talk about. So let me just back up half a second and then I'm going to answer your question. So what it took me 15 years to discover really was that plot consists of two words: connected events, right? It took me 15 years. I think simplicity takes a long time, right? The reason I wanted to write a book that resonated with people, that was really hands-on and practical, was because I didn't get this information anywhere else. So like you, I read all these books and it's like, well, your book needs to be universal to appeal to a reader. And I'm like, well, how do I make it universal? Well, your book needs theme. And I'm like, well, what do I do with the theme? And so I really hated this advice. I hated wishy-washy advice. So I really wanted the book that I never had. So basically, the premise of the book is that you have these two building blocks in your memoir. You have scenes and transitions, and your scenes are defined by actually three different things. So everything has a definition in the book. I wanted things to be very clear. Instead of what is a scene, people don't really know what a scene is. So back to your question, a scene, one way to look at it as the building block of plot, right? Because something always has to happen. I think especially with memoir, people think that a scene is describing everything that happened at my birthday party or everything that happened at my wedding. That's not a scene. And it'll drive your reader crazy because you're just remembering a bunch of stuff on the page. So a scene is defined by three things. Something must happen. You have a specific point in time / place. I put place in parentheses because it's hard for something to happen. It always has to happen in a place. It's kind of automatic. There is a certain point in time and you have subjective writing. So I'll talk about subjective writing if you want in a second. But really what a scene is doing for your book is it's transporting your reader. And people don't realize that. If you start to understand scenes and transitions, and sometimes what I do is I have my students highlight the difference between scenes and transitions in novels or memoirs, you'll start to feel that a scene feels a little different. All of a sudden, we're at a specific point in time, which creates an expectation in your reader's mind that something's going to happen. So even if I say to you, last Thursday, I went to Target, and I just stop there, you're going to go, wait, do you feel when I give you a time anchor, last Thursday, you're expecting for me to tell you something that happened. And the same thing happens in a book. And I see so many writers make the mistake that last Thursday I went to Target. And then 2 days later, we went to the beach. And you're constantly creating this expectation in your reader's brain that something's going to happen, but it never does. So this is a huge memoir writing mistake, is giving your reader a specific point in time and not having something happen. And the other mistake is that we don't transport your reader. Last Thursday, I went to Target and a man ran into my car. Okay, fine. But I want to be there when that happens, right? I want to live through this with you. And it's not all of the stuff that actually happened. It's what you were thinking at the time, which is your subjective writing that gives me this emotional experience and transports me as a reader. Lots of information for you. Sorry for such a long answer.
I love that. I love that. Wendy, I love the time anchoring, because I think that is a tell that is very easy for writers to do. They can just go through, and anytime, like you say in your book, anytime they say, yesterday I did this, or, it took a week for this to happen. Well, what happened during that? And that's your clue, as you say, to write a scene.
What's happening is you're creating an expectation in your reader's brain, because every book they've ever read that says, last Thursday, we went to the beach, something happened and there was a scene. And when you don't give it to them, you're constantly disappointing them. They don't know that. They're just getting frustrated. They don't know why. But I really wanted to create principles.
So talk about subjective also, because is that the part where it's the analysis or the insight into yourself?
So in your book, you have subjective writing and objective writing, and you have scene writing and transition writing. Now, they're not mutually exclusive, right? And so you can have subjective writing in your transition and objective writing. Does that make sense? Like, the world could be divided into people who love ice cream and hate ice cream, and the world could be divided into people who prefer red over blue. They're not mutually exclusive categories, right? So a scene can have subjective writing and objective writing. A transition can also have objective writing and subjective writing. So subjective writing is anything a video camera wouldn't pick up. It's how you felt that moment that your mother walked towards you. Are you terrified of speaking to her after 15 years? What it is you're putting me there with you, not just what I'm seeing. I don't really care that much about visualizing. It's actually, when people try and make me visualize something, I have to concentrate way too hard, and I quit enjoying the book. So objective writing is what I call generic writing. It's what a video camera would have picked up. I even put dialogue in the category of objective writing. It's the couch was red. It was a sunny day. My mother walked toward me. What anyone would put in their book. Now, a lot of people have gotten bad advice that they're supposed to create a visual experience for their reader. And I think that's terrible advice. I think you're supposed to create an emotional experience for your reader. Now, if you're doing a fast-paced detective novel, okay. If you're doing really commercial fiction that's based on plot, there's a lot less subjectivity. There is a lot of creating a visual experience for your writer. But memoir tends to be more on the continuum of literary writing, because it is this emotional journey. It always is. There is this continuum, but the more subjective writing you have in your book, the more you are on the literary side of the spectrum. The less subjective writing you have, the more commercial you are. When you give me lots of subjective writing, I'm having this emotional experience. And the magic of subjective writing is it transports me. That is what makes me forget I'm reading a book and makes me feel like I've become the narrator. I've become you. I'm actually having the experience. Of course, having the experience you had. Of course, it's an illusion, right? But that's what you want to do.
So, for example, like the mother example, if we're saying a mother example, the objective would be, mother walked toward me. She took off her apron and slammed it down on the counter. And then the subjective would be, she always had that impatient attitude with me. It's been there since birth. And I never knew if it was something I said, did, or what was going on in the maelstrom of her mind.
Yes. That could absolutely work, but I try and keep people in the scene as much as possible. So when your mother slams that apron down, what's going through your head? I know it's going to be another terrible day. She's going to insult me. So now I'm keeping us in the present. And it's not wrong to give us the bigger picture. but I try and do that a little bit more in your transition writing. Again, not wrong, but keeping us in the scene itself, not necessarily giving us context, but actually in that moment when my mother slams down the apron, I don't know what's going to happen. And I have this anxiety, the same anxiety I feel every time she slams down the apron. I know what's coming. My mom's, blah, 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 right? Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, I want to unpack that a little bit more. So,
Okay.
if there's some sort of action happening, it's a good idea to keep it anchored in the reaction to that action or event or something like that. And then you can do a little reminiscing or the insight. But again, you're keeping the reader focused on what's happening.
So everything that happens in your book, these tiny little things, my mother slams down the apron in rage. I want to know what that feels like in that moment. I care less about my mother opens the door. She walks toward me. I can tell she's furious. She slams down the apron. She starts cooking in silence. This is all making me visualize all this stuff. And I just don't really care about all these tiny little things happening. What I really care about is my mother slams down the apron as a reader and how you feel in that moment. I know what's going to happen. It's going to be another fight. She's going to ruin my whole day.
Is that the universal that, the reader's picking up on because they're now putting themselves in the place of the writer?
Yes. And let me tell you, so once upon a time, I did read Make Your Book Universal and had no clue what that meant. I mean, I knew in theory what that meant, but I didn't know how to actually put that on the page. I learned something really interesting as a memoir writing coach, and it is that the more personal your book is, the more universal it becomes. And the more you put yourself on the page, the more I see myself in you. So I never had that day of my mother coming in and slamming her apron on the counter, but I know what it's like to be nervous. I know what it's like to fight with family members. It's so important, that subjective writing, your personal point of view, because that is when I see myself in you. There are only so many emotions we can feel as human beings, right? Hopefully the story you're telling me is very different from my own. So I get to live through dating, as a journalist. Oh, interesting. What's it like to be a successful journalist and dating at the same time? I've never lived through that. That sounds like such a fun read. But at the same time, that subjective writing of you putting yourself on the page makes me see myself in you. So you've had a different life, but we've all felt the same things. That's what a good memoir does.
I love that. And so you give a real structure. And it's interesting because I've been very resistant, but I'm going to do it. You said do an outline first.
I hate outlines, right? I am not an outliner. And so I sigh because I feel for you. I really do. I was reluctant to do outlines. Why? Because I love prose. I want to put words on the page. I want to lose myself in that experience of writing, not structuring. But when I came around to the other side, it said if you spend, a few weeks figuring out the structure for your book beforehand, or even if it's a month, or even if it's a few months, and that will save you a decade, maybe. I have people who come to me, they've been working on their memoirs. I think the most is 30 years, right? And I just don't want to spend 30 years on a book. So I try and get people to get their memoir from zero to finished in a year. And it works if you structure it, and that way you're not doing it. It took me 7 years to write my memoir. I don't ever want to spend 7 years on a book again. And if you understand how a memoir works and you understand these concepts that go into structure, you don't have to be writing draft after draft, which I find exhausting because you're doing it right the first time. So
This is so important. So the idea is, and you delineate all the steps of writing the outline. And the outline is just a basis. It could change, it can transform. In the parts of the outline, you said you start with the scenes first, right? Can you break that down? And then you talk about for each scene where the transition is. And usually it's at the end, but not necessarily, right?
So there's a very specific kind of outline that I ask people to create. It's not just kind of what happens in chapter 1 and what happens in chapter 2. What I ask people to do is create an outline based on a 1-sentence description of their scene and then a 1-sentence description of their transition, chapter by chapter. Why do I do that? Well, we start with scenes Because scenes are the building blocks of plot. Scenes are where something happens in your book. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is they try and describe their life, right? And so it's like, that summer was the best summer of my life, and I hung out with my grandmother every day, and I felt so loved. Now, that's okay. There's room for some of that in your memoir, but if that's all your reader gets, it feels like nothing ever happened. It was just a description of your whole life. So the solution to that is scenes, and making sure that you know why your scene exists, because something happened. And so what you do in your outline is you write a list of the scenes, but you only write them in terms of what the main thing that happens in every scene. So if you have a chapter with 6 scenes, for instance, you will write out a 1-sentence description of each scene in terms of the main thing that happened in that scene that gave it a reason to exist. That's the beginning of your outline. Now, transitions exist to help your reader understand what your second scene had to do with your first scene. Your transition is an idea, it's a point you're making that lets your reader know why the fact that you lost your dog on Friday had to do with hooking up with your boyfriend from 20 years ago the day before. So transitions serve that purpose. They're holding your plot together. Again, plot is connected events. Events are in your scenes, the connection happens in your transitions. So you need a transition that makes these two things relevant. With causality, they're already relevant. So causality would be something like, I go out for a walk with my dog and get distracted talking to my neighbor. The next day, I realize that my dog hasn't come home. There's causality because you lost your dog while talking to your neighbor. These events are already related, so you don't need that transition. You have causality because your reader doesn't go, wait, why is she talking about losing her dog after walking her dog the previous day and getting distracted? Your reader doesn't have that question. It makes perfect sense. These are related events. They're causal.
So if you're doing transitions, right, each transition needs to somehow connect to the next scene that's going to come up, right?
It needs to take me from the end of one scene to the beginning of the next. Or really, it needs to help me understand what happens in scene 1 is related to what's going to happen in scene 2.
Okay.
Without giving away what's going to happen in scene 2. Yeah.
Right. So let's go back to the dog example. If you're talking about she's going to get a new dog and she's also breaking up with her boyfriend, maybe the breakup with the boyfriend is happening and she's saying how she feels so alone. And then she notices a stray dog who is also alone in the world, like she feels at this point. Is that kind of the way that
it could work? In theory, it could work. Yes. You're thinking absolutely in the right way about this.
How could it go wrong when someone's like trying to do a transition?
Probably the most common mistake I see is that people start putting in time anchors in their transitions. They start telling me the stuff they did in between 2 events. So they're just remembering their life and nobody really cares. That's the opposite of plot. All this stuff you remember is the opposite of plot. It is the biggest thing I struggle with as a memoir writing coach is getting someone to understand the difference of what they remember. My challenge is breaking apart those memories and then picking the right ones back and connecting them with transitions and turning them into plot.
I see this with personal essays. People will say, like what you said, grandmother was always so important to me. We would bake together. I have fond memories of the family feeling, baking with grandma. And I miss her dearly. She always had such an impact on me. And,
So there's nothing wrong with what you said. Now, how do we fix that and how do we turn that into plot? Well, grandmother always had such a huge impact on me. I remember the day she taught me how to peel potatoes. I don't know, right? And so now I remember the day, you've given me a time anchor, something happened. So now I expect a scene. You've created an expectation. Tell me about the day she taught you to peel potatoes. And now let me know how that changed your life. That was the day I felt my grandmother saw me. Whatever it is that happens, right? So now it's the beginning of plot. If you are scared, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about, a reader. If you're scared that you don't have plot, put in a time anchor. So tell me this descriptive story. My grandmother and I were so close that summer every day. Force yourself to do one day. Make sure that something happens and let me live through that. Don't race past it. I want to live through that moment where something happens in the form of a scene and you've started creating plot.
I really like that. I think that's just such a great, useful tool. You also talk about emotional resonance, the importance of having the emotional connection with the reader. And what is like one or two tips that you want to share about how to do that?
I will tell you a counterintuitive tip. A lot of people think that the way to create emotion in their reader is to say things like, I was so sad that day. I was so happy. I was overjoyed. My heart was racing with fear. I tell people that's actually generic writing. That is the opposite of what you want to do. What you want to do is put me inside your head and give me the thoughts that would have gone through your head at the time. Now, you won't remember, right? But instead of my heart was racing with fear, which doesn't make me feel scared as a reader. I'm like, oh, the narrator was scared. I don't feel scared, right? My heart was racing with fear. Instead, say, I knew someone was outside. He'd been outside for 10 minutes now. I didn't know whether I should walk outside and look. I didn't have any weapons. I had a shovel. Should I grab the shovel? This is all what I'm thinking when I'm terrified. And that actually makes your reader terrified. So I tell people, don't use emotion words. Don't say, I was so scared. Don't use bodily sensations. My heart was racing. Instead, give me the words that would have gone through your head at the time. And that has the effect of making your reader think your thoughts and actually feel what it was you were feeling at the time.
That's great. Now, can this also be applied to writing fiction?
Yes, absolutely. I hope fiction writers don't hate me. I think it's a teensy bit easier. I didn't used to, right? After writing memoir and realizing that you have to work with what actually happened and turn that into plot, and with fiction, you can just make up what's necessary. I do think fiction is a little bit easier, but the principles really are the same. So I focus on memoir because it's tougher to get to plot. I compare fiction to being an oil painter. You start with a blank canvas and you only put on the canvas what's necessary. And a memoir writer has this big chunk of stone. They have everything, but now they have to sculpt away until what's left is something beautiful. It's a little bit harder.
So I have a lot of essays that I've written over the years. Some I've published, some I haven't. And I'm trying to combine and transition and put them all together. And I know some of it is not going to fit, definitely,
Yeah.
and not work within my container. But that's the daunting part for me. I have a lot of material already. What do you recommend when someone has a lot of material already?
I have a lot of people in this circumstance, the person who'd been working on their memoir for 30 years, as an example, right? I have a lot of people who've been doing this for a long time, a lot of people who have thousands of pages, and that's overwhelming. What do I do with this? Now it's even harder, because now I'm not starting from scratch with this nice little outline and thinking about crafting this story from the ground up. So what I tell to people is, well, we're actually going to do the exact same thing as if you hadn't written these pages. We are not throwing them away, by the way. We're going to take your 1,000 pages. I'm just going to guess you have 1,000, Estelle. I don't know how many you have, but let's say you have 1,000. Okay. So you take those pages and you put them in a desk drawer, and lovingly, and you're just putting them on hold. And I really do suggest you start from the ground up, because 1,000 pages is overwhelming. It's just going to drive you crazy. You know what you've written? Think about your story. The same suggestions I would give to someone who was starting their story from scratch. Okay, chapter 1, what happens? Just a list of things that happen. Those are going to be your scenes, right? And then look at that list of things, write in your transitions. Okay, now you have structure in chapter 1. Do this for your whole book. Doesn't have to be perfect structure. Do it quickly. You're starting to get your structure in place. And now you have a story. You've crafted a story that's built on scenes and transitions. And now you take those 1,000 pages and you go, oh, okay, well, here's the scene on page 55 that would go here in chapter 3. And so now you can start fleshing this out with what you already have. I will tell you the transitions in your essays are probably going to get thrown away for the most part, because transitions connect your scenes, and you're probably going to be reordering this. So transitions tend to get lost in this way of doing things in the interest of writing a much better book, but a lot of the scenes will stay. You're just going to connect them now in a different way to tell your story.
That's great. Now, when people are writing memoir, I've seen it all different ways. They come out the other end, right? At some point. And do you share that in the beginning, or do you start from the point of you don't share it until the end?
That dramatic moment, you mean? So you start with this dramatic moment. It depends. So a lot of people get their chronology out of whack because they don't really understand what a good memoir writer is doing. Because I see a lot of memoirs where it feels like they're not chronological. So they're not really understanding the principles of chronology. But I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, for instance, the Jeanette Walls, the Glass Castle, right? A homeless mother, and then we start in childhood. Chapter 1 starts in childhood. We have a prologue. Jeanette Walls is in New York going to a fancy dinner, and her mother's rifling through the trash can. Homeless mother, right? So do we start there in this dramatic moment? The answer depends on the book. But I tell people that this is called a suspense scene, right? It doesn't really affect the chronology of your book. It's kind of a little teaser at the beginning. Some people need it, some people don't. The mistakes I see are that people don't leave that scene with suspense. They have different names for this, but a lot of people will start at a different place and give me a whole chapter, and then the next chapter is in a totally different place and time, and they have their reader completely confused. So a suspense scene is what I call it. It's outside of the chronology of your book. So sometimes you use it in the same way movies use this device. Something dramatic happens, and then we go back to the beginning of the story. I tell people to make that decision later. It's not really affecting the chronology of your story. And so if people are reading your book and they say, well, chapter 1's not that exciting, maybe you need that suspense scene. I'll talk about exciting in a minute, what exciting actually means. But if chapter 1 really pulls me in, you probably don't need it. You just start at the chronological beginning. So let me talk about what I mean by exciting. Some people call it the hook, right? This scene at the beginning, this dramatic scene that pulls people in. And people are really concerned because they've read books, but you got to hook your reader, you got to get them on the first page. And they're really concerned that they've got to do something incredibly dramatic. And I don't think that's the case. You have to do something very emotional. Sometimes telling me, I miss my son. I haven't seen him for 5 days. I miss my baby. I don't know. That can pull me in more of a way than like, there's gunfire outside, the bombs, I hear the bombs in the distance. I don't know. That doesn't really pull me in if I want to read a memoir, if I want to read this personal experience. So this fear that you have to start with something super dramatic, I think is way blown out of proportion. I think you need to start with something emotional. You need to make me care.
That's really good. Let's say somebody had mental health issues, like some book is being written about somebody with mental health issues that they overcame, right? Would they start in the present? They've overcome it, they're happy, or would that be the reveal at the end?
Okay, there are two concepts here. So my quick answer to your question is no. You don't want to know. That's the whole reason I'm reading the book. This is a quest. I started in a dark place, and all of these things happened in a much better emotional place at the end. So that's the idea of a search in your book, which is important. We need some sense of a search. There's also this concept that some people get confused by called the older, wiser narrator. Now, the older, wiser narrator is the Estelle I'm looking at today. So Estelle, when you write your book, we have this perspective. You don't have to do this, but I would say most memoir writers do. It's something wonderful to take advantage of. Who is the book written by, actually? Well, some people would say it's written by the Estelle I'm looking at today, who says, looking back now, I laugh at the dating decisions I made. I was young and foolish and didn't really know what to look for in a man, right? That's the older, wiser narrator. Then, the first guy I dated, blah, blah, blah. So now we're starting to get into the story. So then you can tell me it from the point of view of the younger Estelle who actually lived through these events. You can go back and forth. But many books have this older, wiser narrator who can come in and add extra insight. The mistake I see people make, we don't want to know that I'm sitting here, in New Jersey, in my home, at my typewriter, thinking about my life, and we don't want that. We don't really want to know about your current life. It's just this kind of anonymous, not really anonymous, but this narrator who we know is writing from an older perspective. So this narrator has insight that the Estelle, the younger Estelle, didn't have at the time. So I love the older, wiser narrator because it allows you to add all this richness to your book.
I really like that. Then you talk about in terms of the engineering, and you also give links where people can email to get worksheets, which I will be doing.
Super.
And I think they just click on it and they get the worksheets. And you also talk about then once they've written the outline, how to start writing the scenes and write the scenes. And then the transitions need to be connected to each scene. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. You got it.
And how many scenes are appropriate for, let's say, a 70,000 word memoir?
I never do the math because I always think in terms of chapters. So I tend to think anywhere from 5 to 10 scenes per chapter is ideal. And let me tell you why. If you have way too many scenes, you're going to have a hard time connecting them into a single story. And if you have too few scenes, you're not going to have enough happening for there to be a story. So I think in terms of chapters. Now, you'll see a lot of memoirs out there. Some of them have 88 chapters. I think of chapters as roughly between 8 and 14. Having said that, those are like these chunks of story. You're going to be creating these, let's say, 12 chunks of story in your memoir. Afterwards, if you want to break them into 88 chapters, I don't really care, right? So I think when I use the word chapter, I'm thinking in terms of chunks of story. Sometimes I call chapters containers for your scenes, because that's how many scenes we're going to be connecting to create a story.
That's a great way to explain it because I've seen as much as like 80 chapters, and I've seen
Yes.
some people want really short chapters. Like there seems to
Yeah.
be a trend today towards really short chapters. And somebody told me, I think it was Bonnie Reichart who wrote the book How to Share an Egg, which is a memoir. She said that she tried to have one point for each chapter, one main thing for, but she had very short chapters and then had a lot of them. What are some more of the mistakes that you've seen? Because I think that's really helpful. And you also share it by examples and anecdotes in your books of students that you've worked with and how they either fixed mistakes or didn't have them and what a mistake would have been. And I think that's very helpful to show.
So the whole book came about as an idea of how to fix the mistakes I kept seeing as a memoir writing coach, right? So I came up with the principles by reverse engineering the mistakes I saw. I would say, well, that's not working. Mistakes would fall into categories. There are only so many mistakes you can make, I think, as a memoir writer. So they'd fall into categories. And I would say, well, I keep saying this mistake over and over again. Why does it bother me, first of all? What is happening? What is wrong about what these people are doing? And how would I fix it? Okay. Now, how do I create a principle so that people don't make this mistake in the first place, right? So that's how the whole book came about. These tiny mistakes after reading over 1,000 texts, over the course of 15 years. So it took me a really long time, right, to figure out how to write a memoir right the first time. But the big ones really are writing from memory. So for instance, if you are describing going back home for Christmas to be with your parents, and it's like, and you arrive at the airport, and then it's the cab ride to your parents' house, and then it's seeing your mother for the first time, and then it's breakfast the next morning, and then it's sleeping terribly that night. That's not plot. That's a bunch of stuff you remember, and it's so boring for a reader. So that's the biggest one I see. And so it's like tons of stuff is happening, which is also the same for a reader as the opposite extreme where nothing is happening. When all this stuff is happening, your reader doesn't know what to take away from it. The other extreme is you're just describing your life, so nothing is happening. Both of these, are, strangely enough, are opposite problems, but they kind of feel the same to the reader. It's like they don't know what to take away from your book. They keep waiting for something to happen, or they keep waiting to understand why all this stuff is happening.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I know you told me that you're working on a reality show that's about writing, and I love that idea.
So I had this idea a long time ago. I was like, oh, why do writers not have a reality show? Everyone else gets a reality show. And I kind of knew the answer. Reality shows are visual. So you have a camera, it's a visual medium, and how boring is it to watch someone write? Now, it's exciting to watch someone make a cake, all the artistry that goes into that. It's visual, it's very interesting. I had this in the back of my mind, how do we solve this problem? So just kind of in the back of my head, and one day it kind of occurred to me, well, what if we don't actually spend a lot of time filming them writing? What if we spend the time of them having activities, so they go through this experience, which is visual, and they read their writing, which can also be emotionally affecting, and that would be the format for the reality show. So I live in Cusco, Peru, and I thought, why don't we wound up being 9 writers, to Cusco and give them these cultural experiences. And so that's what we'll film, these interesting cultural experiences, and we'll have them write about them. And in each episode, we'll eliminate one person until we have a winner. We shot this a couple months ago. Editing is going to take a long time, so it's not going to come out till next year. It's going to be on my YouTube channel, but it was really a fascinating experience. I studied film. I've lived in South America forever. I went to film school in Bolivia, strange fact about me. So I have some background in this, and I had a Peruvian crew, and people from all over the world compete. We chose 9 contestants out of a lot of applicants. And so we had contestants from New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the UK, the United States, Australia. So, yeah.
That is so cool. And was there a grand prize for the winner?
There was. So I have to be careful not to reveal any information about the winner's identity. Yes, the winner got a $10,000 book advance. We are covering the production costs. I have a small press called Parentheses Press, and the winner also got $15,000 worth of coaching. So, and all of the contestants were flown out to Peru and had their expenses covered. It's called Writer Flight. It will come out next year. Editing process is really intimidating. I have 110 hours of footage that I have to get down to 6 hours. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
Wow. Well, I'll include your YouTube channel link and
super.
in the show notes. Absolutely. This has been such a great discussion. Is there anything that I didn't ask you or we didn't talk about that you want to point out before we end this great conversation?
You have been the best interviewer ever. You've asked such great questions. I love that you read the book and you really understood it. I would just maybe end with a tiny bit of advice. I think people can get really stuck when it comes to writing. They get really frustrated and they're like, what scene goes first? And they ask themselves these questions and they feel this pressure on themselves to get it right. Just having worked with a lot of clients, I see this happen time and time again. It happens to me too. I would say a bad decision is better than no decision. Who cares? Just do something. So I think people get so stuck on trying to make it perfect. Now, the subtitle of my book is Make Your First Draft Your Final Draft. But I don't mean by that to make it perfect the first time. What I'm trying to get people to do is understand how a book works. You can rewrite the prose as many times as you like and polish it and make it better, right? But don't get stuck. Don't get frustrated on like what scene comes first and what scene comes next. And, oh, but in order for a person to understand the scene, they have to understand that 15 years earlier I got in a car crash. But in order to, and so our brains go like that. Just start. Just start. A bad decision is better than no decision. If you make the wrong decision, you can always change it. So just write. The opposite of what I usually say.
That's advice to live and write by. I love it. This has been such a pleasure talking with you, everyone. The Memoir Engineering System. Make your first draft your final draft.
Thank you so much, Estelle.
Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.